Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from California, USA, Lakshmi Sharma. Lakshmi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Lakshmi is the Chief Product and Strategy Officer. She's a board member. She's an investor, very, very passionate about DEI and an executive coach. And she's one of the top 25 software product executives of 2022 and a winner of Google's 2020 Feats of Engineering Award. So Lakshmi, before we talk about all the work that you do in the area of growth and strategy, tell me about your own amazing journey.
Yeah, professionally and personally. I'll talk about professionally, I started my journey as a software engineer, and I've been fortunate that I worked in places and companies where there was some pivotal moment in the time and place and time where I was. So the company was transforming, and either business transformation, technical transformation. So every time I took those roles and every time a transformation happened, there are people, process, and technology changes that you learn, right? You learn about how people behave when changes happen, and then what processes do you need to put into place in order for those transformations to happen. And then what is the technology that is driving it? So because I've always been in technology driven companies, and also when I say technology, I also say technology that influences business. So I've always been in business influencing kind of places. So I've been really fortunate to have had those experiences, and there would be anxiety and there would be chaos, and then there are things not defined, and then you grow along with it. Right? You grow to have resilience, you grow to have empathy about people, about companies, and about real people. So all of that across, because of those roles I've had in different countries, different cities and states within the United States, and traveling as part of that has built massive I would say empathy for change, empathy for how people behave, how it impacts people's life for change. So so growing along with that, skills along with that, while it has given me a lot of say professional skills, it has evolved me and grown me as a person.
Fascinating.
So that's kind of my professional journey. And very quick on the personal side, I was born and brought up in Delhi in India, and born in a very humble family. My parents, my mom was never educated. My dad high school graduate, and then none of the girls in the family ever went to college, or either my mom's side or my dad's side. So my dad was that change agent. He took that upon, and my mom, my mom was a tailor. She was, my mom and dad, they were hustlers. We have done pawn shop, and then kite shop, and then taking small candies and putting them during summer to get some money, and making samosas and doing all of that, and then building different businesses like hardware business or metal business. So I learned hustling from my parents, that that's fine. One thing doesn't work, something else will work out. And professionally, my dad was a peon in Delhi Electric Engineering Board. So he wouldn't really, settle for just doing one role, because that would define him as a peon. And so, not taking not settling down with something that has been defined by education or something. So that that hustling mentality, then I not giving up. And also that his belief that, because when he saw in Delhi Electric Board that people were called engineers and those were his officers. So then he's like, oh, I want my kids to be officers. I want them to be business. So I learned learning, but he still was always my mom, who would sew clothes to make money and help my dad. And she was a tailor. So learning from that every work is equal, and respect every opportunity, and learn, and then everything is good thing if it is done for the betterment of the family and the people in it, and the love for education. My dad believed that if we all would educate, and then he had to fight for it. It didn't come easy on him, and my mom supported throughout. So just getting that personal humbleness and hustling mentality, and keeping family and education first mentality, that's really, and I'm really a product of all of that.
Amazing. What an amazing journey. Thank you, Lakshmi, for sharing it. And you must be so proud of your parents. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, Lakshmi, you also, when I was reading and preparing for my conversation with you, I found that, you've got a lot of experience and interest in growth in corporate strategy. So, we're going to focus our discussion today on growth in corporate strategy. My first question to you is, how do you approach the challenge of scaling a product from zero to a million dollar revenue?
Everything like, so growth, and it's so interesting that I'm going to teach a course, in fact, like starting in 2 weeks at Stanford. It's a continuing education where the course title is that, how do you grow a product for customer success? So coming back, so growth is like, there are growth from a parameter perspective. When a company is thinking of growth, most important is like revenue, right? So revenue. And then when you are thinking, like I take a look of and I'm, as I said, like I'm a hustler, think about numbers. So think numbers. Numbers are like top line, bottom line, right? Top line drives revenue, bottom line adds to your cost, right? Anything that you're doing, there is an R&D to it because we're technology companies, and then there will be a cost associated with it. But in that process, then if the revenue is not meeting the goals or the profitability, revenue minus cost, profit, is like, and hopefully it is profitability, profit. But if it is not, it is like loss, right? So then how do you, in order to catch up on that difference, then are there some efficiencies that you can meet in order to catch up to the level that when the profit happens? So let's keep like those three things, top line, bottom line, and then efficiency. So if you think of growth with the perspective of numbers and these three KPIs, then I think for any product manager or any leader in the organization, the problem to solve becomes easier. So when it's a small company, let's say currently I'm working with a startup called Hawks, which is like founding members. I'm the first product manager, like founding product managers working on accelerating passwordless journey for every user in the world. So we want to grow. So but then growth, top line, bottom line. So keeping that framework, but the growth for this size company, we have to be very clear, like is growth before you hit the revenue, it's a number of customers, right? We need to get customers. We need to get design partners. In order to do that, what are the things we do? So defining those KPIs, that is, in order to draw revenue, you need customers. And then customers, you need to increase the number of customers. In order to drive customers, what do you need? So a small company can focus on customer growth as a growth parameter. And maybe that's why they're kind of, a startup would like to do that. But then you can use that, then you validate your problem, because all of that is happening for a customer, for an end user. If you're B2B or going to business, then it is a customer. If you're going to consumer, it is user. So growth needs to be for solving a problem for someone. That could be a business or that could be a user. So your parameter, your KPI should first be addressing, like, am I getting a customer? Am I getting a user? So those KPI. So anything that you do as a product leader, as I said, making sure that you know what your parameters are, what KPIs, and if you are already a company which has customers, which is driving revenue, then you kind of start looking into like the first framework, because your end goal is to build a profitable business, because profitability gives you money which you can reinvest, right? You want to be able to, long time back when I did my MBA, it was the definition of a corporate, which you said like corporate strategy, the definition of an enterprise from like MBA perspective, it's a running entity, right? Running. In order to run, you need a fuel, and that fuel comes from profitability. So kind of that's the framework I use, like for a long term, a profitable engine where you can use the profit to reinvest. But then in order to get there, you understanding the problem that you're solving, that is solved for a customer or a consumer. And then in order to drive that growth, how do you solve the problem so that you can grow these two KPIs and eventually get to a profitable model?
Well said. What a great response. Lakshmi, my next question is, how can one balance the need for innovation with the risks involved with bringing a new product to market?
Yeah. So again, I'm a framework person. You will see throughout my conversation. For me, life becomes easy when it is a framework. Especially in technology companies, And which, to be honest, like every company these days is a technology company. Every business is disrupted because of technology, and surely because of generative AI. So because since technology, right, technology is disruptor or technology is an enabler, right? Let's take either of them. And if you are in a business where you are yourself disrupted because of someone else, right? So first understanding where in the market segment or industry do you sit? Let's say if I'm finance or if I'm agriculture, and then I'm being disrupted by technology because there are agri-tech or there are fintech companies who may be taking away my traditional business of years, right? Then technology becomes an urgency for me, right? Because otherwise I would lose my business, right? So then innovation in technology would really be what I call like, the requirement or investment requirement for running my business. So it is not really an innovation, it is the need for the business. It becomes my top priority. But then let's say I'm already a company which is built on like, in the name of, let's say, a startup, like, or my current company, or like say other big names like where I work, like Fastly or Target or like, Google's. When those companies, they have, let's say Fastly and Google, they have a brand because of their technical innovation. They became famous because they solved a problem with a technology. So they need to continue to sustain that, right? Or sustain that innovation at a faster pace than others, because one, for the brand, because they get premium because of the brand, right? And then people have an expectations of that brand. So you need to invest some amount, not because like, just because you have a need for today, but in order to stay ahead of rest of the industries, because that's the premium you have been getting. And that's the reason that people kind of, you're able to get the right people. Again, going back, you're able to get the right talent, you're able to get the right, attention, and you're able to get right customers and user way easier than others because you build that brand. So for some companies, right, it will be innovation because of continued, brand, brand and the reason that customers come to your products for. For others, it's an urgency and need to even exist.
Amazing. Thank you. My next question is that how do you ensure that corporate strategy aligns with the overall vision and goals of a company?
So, anything that you do, like, I'm a chief product officer and chief strategy officer. Anything that I do in the organization, product or engineering investment, doesn't matter all the way where you sit in the organization. One question I always ask my teams or anywhere level in the team, that if you don't know, like, if you don't know one thing, your company's mission, your company's vision, and the OKRs, the leadership level OKRs. OKRs are objective key results, right? Which communicated to you. And you can't map your own day-to-day work, literally day-to-day work, to that mapping. Then the whole P&L thing, the growth that I talked about, the framework, we would never have the right mapping and the transparency and the trust of the organization into what you're doing. Because so I believe, and then I have seen and I have been able to enable along with my peers and my leaders in various organizations, that setting up, does any objective that a particular leader or a group sets, if the leadership has not set up their own objectives and not clarified, right, that how that objective meets that top level mission and vision statement, and how does it drive a result, whether it is a growth result for customer growth or revenue growth. If those things are not top down, then, and every person in the org is not mapping their objectives and their goals to those those shared results and objectives and mapping, then the org wouldn't really sustain for a long time in a transparent, healthy, and sustainable way. So it has to be top down. The leadership should be clearly communicating their objectives and goals and how they map to the mission, and then rest of the org should also set up their goals and objectives, and there should be a very clear measurement and tracking of those goals outcomes, so that we know where we are measuring and tracking along those kind of goals. There has to be a clear quantifiable metrics and measurement. And on a regular basis, let's say some frequency that you choose, are you meeting those criteria or not? And that should be visible to the entire org.
Amazing. My next question is that how can a leader foster a culture of innovation within a company? And how can the leader manage the risks associated with innovation?
I think risk, you have to first, you have to allow people to take risks. So I'm just kind of restating what you said.
Yeah.
But if innovation comes with a risk, right? Because we have to make an assumption. So it shouldn't come with a risk, but let's make an assumption that innovation can either go and be profitable, can help customer growth, all these KPIs we talked about, can help efficiency, or can help revenue efficiency, or customer or user growth. Let's say these KPIs. Innovation can help you with that. Or innovation can just be a sunk cost because we tried it, tested it, and everybody believed in it for any reason, for whatever reason, right? The technology crashed or the market crashed. It may be a sunk cost. But then you still have to take that chance, because the external parameters are not in your control. You need to continue to innovate because, there will be people who should always be looking at, I call it so 3 year, right? 3 year down the line. After 2 years, what should you be doing? Because you're not stopping the company. Remember, it's a running entity. So, but then the leadership or the company should be, people in the organization should be communicated that there is no adverse outcome to your progress, to your growth in the company, if the outcomes of the innovations are not in the profitability side or the growth side. So they should be given that, not just freedom, but that bounded freedom, for employees and an organization to allow to take risk for innovations, because it's only 50-50, right? And of course, over time, the same people, they're allowed to kind of test and validate their assumptions and hypotheses in the, what they want to try as part of innovation, they will become better at that, right? But if you don't have a process or a framework, or if you haven't communicated that innovation is our DNA, and then everybody, right, is allowed to do that, and in fact encouraged to do that, and you would be rewarded for that. And in case of, and you can also set up that in case it doesn't end up leading to the growth, and in fact it doesn't go in the direction, but then let's come back with what is the learning, and then we learn from that so that we don't make those mistakes, because you don't want those same people to continue to make mistakes either. That could also send a wrong message. But yes, creating that culture and communicating that, so that people take risk and risk for innovation. That culture is really important.
Well said. Great response. Lakshmi, how, you're an engineer, you're in software, you're such a senior corporate leader. How is technology or digital transformation or, AI or chat GPT or, whatever else is now coming in, how has technology affected strategy for growth and product development?
Oh, GenAI or Chat GPT or Gemini, Claude, anything that you talk about, they have. So that is the biggest disruptor after cloud. I've said that, in many interviews before that. Cloud was the biggest disruptor in my mind. Thinking that people won't have control of their own assets, despite having billions of dollars to control that and let somebody else take control of those assets. To even let that go feeling, despite being that billions of dollars company and a cloud company manage it for you, that was a big, people mindset change, right? That yes, we can do that. So that was a big disruption. But then, and that kind of, at that time, the way people will think of growth is okay, how can I, reduce my CapEx, and how can I go from CapEx model to OpEx model, or then, just have subscription model, then cloud to SaaS model. So there were all these different business models or pricing models that evolved, which would help you, define your growth. And then that cloud also led to SaaS also led to different kinds of marketing tools and business systems tools, and newer companies came in, which would help you, get better visibility into How do you build your pipeline? How do you kind of target your campaigns and target your customers? How do you do customer success and customer support? So that was kind of one set of transformation that happened with cloud and SaaS, and newer companies could, and software companies could build faster. And then you can go from day zero in your product to customer adoption. And then just churn that whole end-to-end pipeline and revenue and growth. But then coming back now, so say Gen AI, and that has changed how it has changed strategy. Because there are now so many big companies, and plus, various companies which have years of data sets and which have years of efforts in building these models. They're not just models, they're large language models, where you can converse with something, not just kind of search something or use an API to do your, modeling with data sets in a cloud. But anybody, any user, can just go and get a free version of OpenAI, any of those models, right? So you have llamas or Geminis or Claude, anything. You just sit and you feel like you have the power to build a company. And you can solve a problem by talking to it, right? You can use a language which you couldn't do before. You can, and if you're not really good in text conversion, you can do a video conversion, right? And you can plan or forecast, and you can see a word of a product word. Let's say you can simulate different things which you couldn't. It's very powerful. It's so powerful for you to be able to see certain things for which you might have needed a lot of user research and user experience. You could do that in a few seconds.
Correct.
So I think that correlation of data and being able to converse in the medium of communication that I prefer, with a massive amount of data sets and the models that have already been trained for years, that that increases the speed of strategy execution. So not so much just strategy, but the execution on that strategy is what I believe is made powerful with this introduction of the newer kind of technologies. I'm very excited.
Well said. And therefore, my last question to you, continuing from what you've just said, what are some of the trends in technology that you are most excited about that could have a significant impact on strategy in the next few years?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in us, every individual on internet, and me and you, we all not living in a world where we are afraid of, oh my God, I can get hacked, my company can get hacked, and somebody can steal money from somebody's account. So I'm a believer that technology has a power to fix that. So, and this, from a trend perspective, there are many companies, to be honest, which are coming, which are sitting and, on top of, built on LLMs and built on Gen AI. People are solving a lot of problems. But I would love for the problems of my data and my information can never get hacked, And I wouldn't say call trend, but I'm saying that, but from that perspective that my information stays with me, and even somebody in my family, let's say, would not be able to access that data or information without my permission. I would love for that to be guaranteed, let's say. I hope I can reach that word, and I can, because I want to be part of that. The reason I say that, because I think I have a power, and with people who are solving similar problems in today's technology to do that. And from a trend perspective, I think it's just data is the queen. So there is so much more data. And then how, from, again, more than just trend, that how responsible we can become together, not just kind of building more and more companies on it, but then there are a lot of companies coming based on the data and the model, but then how can we drive a responsible use of AI on that? That's kind of, a lot of companies, by the way, are already being built on responsible AI, responsible agriculture, responsible environment, because now they don't have to worry about the technology as such. They can just kind of put those. So I would like to see, I'm already seeing a lot of these mission-based companies being built faster than ever before. So that's a trend that I would like to see, and that is being built. So how much more a responsible citizen, whether it is environment, agriculture, or like just as human beings, we become in using the data and driving value out of it.
Amazing. Lakshmi, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. What an amazing journey you had personally. Grateful you shared that journey with me. Thank you so much for speaking to me about corporate strategy, growth. We spoke about innovation. We spoke about fostering a culture of innovation. We spoke about how to set goals for a company. We spoke about digital transformation. And finally, we spoke about your vision for the future of technology. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. And, thank you again for your time, and good luck to you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.